Welcome to San Francisco, California. It's about 1:35, 1:40 in the afternoon, and thank you for coming. Thank you for supporting by coming. The George Washington High School Alumni Association is hosting this educational forum to protect, to prevent anything from happening from these New Deal murals that Victor Arnautoff created in the 1930s. Let me put it to you this way. It's George Washington's birthday. We all know what he's known for. And we're going to concentrate on things in terms of symbolism, part of America's dark history. And I'm hoping that if you don't know anything about this, you'll learn something from it. And if you're not really sure about our issues, maybe you will learn from the discussion. I ask that you double check, make sure your cell phones are silenced. I ask that you be respectful while the speakers and the moderators are speaking. And even if you have an opposition, I ask that you just listen. And at the end of the forum, we will have an open mic on either side. And so you can share your feelings and tell us your thoughts or ask a question. We have some inspirational, great moderators from KGO Radio 810. Please welcome Pat Thurston and John Rothman. John Rothman, if you didn't know, is also president of the Alumni Association.
I don't think you're supposed to sit yet, John.
What?
Get over here. So he's my colleague, John Rothman. I'm Pat Thurston. And we're so happy to be here today because for John, this is an issue that he has lived for a period of time. He's the president of the Alumni Association at George Washington High School. I'm just a talk show host. I didn't know anything about this until one of our guests, Gray Brechin, introduced me to the issue. And then John and Gray kind of linked up. And I've learned more, and the more I learn, the more passionate I become about it. We've got some fabulous speakers today who can give you their perspectives. And of course, we do want to hear from you as well, kind of like we do on the air, eh, John?
Exactly. And I want to be clear. We want this to be a forum. We know there are people here who take a contrary view, and they will have the opportunity to speak. But what has happened today is that we've assembled a panel that is quite remarkable. And I understand that we have to do that. So why don't we do it now, Pat?
Okay, we are going to introduce to you our speakers. We're going to start with Robert Flynn Johnson. Robert is a retired San Francisco Fine Arts Museum curator. Robert.
Thank you. And Dr. Gray Brechin, a geography professor at UC Berkeley and the New Deal project architect.
Hi, Gray. Susan Cervantes is an artist and the founder of Precita Muralists Association. Susan.
Enrique Chagoya is an artist and an art professor at Stanford University.
Woo-hoo. John Learned is the president of the American Indian Center of the Great Plains, based in Kansas City, Missouri, and he works with the Kansas City Chiefs and the Atlanta Braves to promote proactive activities and positive messaging.
Barth Chief Eagle Robinson is from the Rosebud Sioux tribe in South Dakota. He was a tribal liaison for the U.S. Army on the Lakota helicopter issue. He worked with the Washington Redskins and the University of Utah of Native American mascot processions.
And please welcome Associate Art Professor Dewey Crumpler at the San Francisco Art Institute. Dewey is the amazing artist who completed the George Washington High School response murals in 1974. We're so honored to have him here.
And now, ladies and gentlemen, Matt Gonzalez is an artist, currently the lead San Francisco public defender, a former president of the San Francisco Board of Supervisors, a former candidate for mayor, and, most important of all, a defeated candidate for Vice President of the United States.
And please welcome Dr. Robert Cherny. Dr. Cherny is Victor Arnautoff's biographer. He's a retired history professor at San Francisco State University. And just so you know, Victor Arnautoff is the artist who painted the murals that we're talking about today.
And you'll hear about him. I do want to acknowledge that Dr. Cherny's daughter and his two granddaughters are here. Would you stand up just to take a bow? Especially the granddaughters. There they are, over there.
Hi!
And I was saying it's especially nice for the granddaughters to understand the very significant role that their grandfather plays. And
Okay, well, no, I get to announce my daughters here, too.
Sophie, of course.
Sophie is right here. Sophie, stand up. This is my baby girl, one of my triplets that I am so proud of. All right.
Now you've got the whole story here. I want now to call on Lope, and he will share a few comments. Let me indicate to you, I am the president of the Alumni Association. I have been since 1974. If you do a little counting here, I'm about to hit 50 years. But I want you to know that as president of the association, I'm very thrilled because Lope Yap Lee is one of the greatest guys I've ever run into. And his work on this project has been exemplary in every way. And you didn't bring your daughter Athena with you, did you?
I did not.
I'm sorry, because she needs to know this. Now, I do want you all to know, and Matt, this will certainly cause you some appreciation, and that is that whenever Lope calls me, remember I'm president, he's vice president, he asks, and how are you feeling today, Mr. President? And without further ado, our vice president, and really the guy who has spearheaded everything, Lope Yap.
Thank you. I wanted to let you know that there were several people we invited, and they were really frustrated they couldn't make it today. That would include Danny Glover. That would include Reverend Amos Brown, the San Francisco NAACP president. And really, unfortunately for us, really a lot is Alice Walker. And Alice, unfortunately, is out of the country until next weekend. But I want to read you her letter because I think it's a good way to start the discussion. She sent this to me on February 5th. It is never a good idea to destroy art. It is a better idea to explain it. That is what education helps us to do. That is what Washington High School can help us do. With that present controversy over the Victor Arnautoff murals that depict George Washington in a truer light than most other works and histories. Sometimes it's hard to see what is good for us. That is why we have teachers. Teachers are some of my favorite people in the world because of this. Though it's a heavy burden, the attempt to depict truthfully some of our often disastrous history is the one that the dedicated teachers of our children must undertake. We do not want ignorance for our young. That is why we send them to school. We do not want them to face life in a rosy-colored fantasy whose ever-perceived truth is a fabrication designed to keep them enslaved. Ignorance is a kind of slavery, perhaps the most profound. George Washington, like other presidents the U.S. has had, was in many ways a monster. It is well known now that, though this was hidden for a couple of centuries, that he was chasing his slave catchers to recapture a runaway woman, Ona Judge, whom he owned at the time of his death. After his death, his wife Martha continued the chase. The reality that he and subsequent U.S. presidents presided over the genocide of the indigenous population of this land, the Native Americans and other enslavement of Africans brought here to basically build the country. It's not possible any longer to cover it up. What to do? Washington High is an institute of learning from this history. Blessings on all who struggle with this issue. It is well to do so. This is our country. It is time we begin to create it in the image we prefer. Truth through harsh is a wonderful light. we can be brave and truly comprehend where we've been, and from what that experience, see more clearly where we need to go. With love and faith, Alice Walker. The PS to this is her PS. Alice Walker's daughter, Mayor Willie Brown's daughter, also was our alums from George Washington High School. So this is her PS. My contribution to this endeavor to live with the truth rather than fantasy is to offer 10 copies of Erica Armstrong Dunbar's book to the school library and to visit the school at some point to discuss it with selected students. I will also invite my daughter and grandson to accompany me. From my experience, true learning is a grassroots effort. Our own enthusiasm is ignited when those who love us demonstrate their concern. Thank you.
Thank you, Lope. That is, what an amazing letter from an amazing woman, and a great way to start off our discussion with our distinguished guest speakers. I'm really looking forward to hearing from each and every one of you. Everybody has something to contribute to this discussion. We're talking about art, the value of art, art that makes you uncomfortable. We're talking about America's dark history. We're talking about censorship, and we're talking about so much more. So to begin our discussion, I am delighted to ask Robert Flynn Johnson to please come forward and to share your thoughts on the murals at George Washington High School.
Thank you. Art is subjective. 5% of the population do not like Rembrandt. 5% of the population do not like Picasso. Unfortunately, 90% of the population have never heard of either of them. That's why I've devoted my life to education. Oscar Wilde said that the only person who likes all art equally is an auctioneer, which is fairly true. So this idea that art is some sort of objective truth is not. It is in the eyes of the beholder. I spent 32 years as a curator in charge of the Achenbach Foundation at the Fine Arts Museums in San Francisco. I spent 30 years teaching art history at the San Francisco Art Institute, and I later taught at Stanford and UC Santa Cruz. I have spent my whole adult career practically here in San Francisco, been here 45 years. I love San Francisco. I love the live and let live quality of this city. Some people say it's an asylum without a fence around it, but I think, I'm not sure, I maybe kind of agree a little bit. I love the fact of its diversity of opinion and its freedom to have people express themselves as we're doing today. I'm concerned and troubled about this, in my opinion, manufactured controversy about the murals at George Washington High School. I just want to raise a couple of questions this afternoon. Are they art? I think the universal feeling is they are art. Victor Arnautoff studied with Diego Rivera in Murals. They are considered very important works of art, so I don't think that's under question. Are they historically accurate? Is there the mythology in these paintings of Washington throwing $1 across the Potomac? Is there pictures of him, the mythology of him cutting down a cherry tree? No. They are accurate. It's not a completely pretty history, but they are accurate. Are they obscene? No. Although sometimes, one of the things I can't believe is people haven't made any noise about the floating female nude in the murals too. A lot of the kids at the high school say, "Let's meet under the naked woman," you know. So it's amazing that that hasn't been a controversy, thank God. Are they racist? Well, in my opinion, no. Are they potentially upsetting? Absolutely. They are just as upsetting as Schindler's List or Judgment in Nuremberg, the movies. They're just as upsetting as To Kill a Mockingbird or Mississippi Burning or 12 Years a Slave. They're just as upsetting as Dances and Wolves and Bury My Heart in Wounded Knee. These are all the sorts of topics that young adults, and I have to emphasize, George Washington High School is a school for young adults. It's for people that should be given history, it should be given works of art that might be disturbing, but have truths that need to be discussed. And so the nature, again, as I go back to it, is art subjective? Yes, art is absolutely subjective. Art is to create dialogue. Art is not made to answer questions so much as it's to ask questions. And that's what these murals are about. And I couldn't find a more perfect place for them to be, in a place for learning of young adults. Thank you.
And now it's my pleasure to introduce Robert Cherny, who is the author of the book about Arnautoff, and we await your comments. And I'm sure your granddaughters especially are awaiting your comments.
Thanks, John. Good afternoon. Let me begin by saying that, of course, I agree that the murals should not be covered. But I also urge that there should be appropriate signage explaining the subject matter and the intent of the artist, and there should be treatment of the murals in the school's curriculum. They should provide a learning experience. Based on my research, I want to give you my understanding of the two most controversial murals, and it is that Arnautoff was presenting a critique of Washington and of Western expansion. He depicted Washington as a slaveholder by presenting images of enslaved African Americans working on Washington's Mount Vernon plantation. Most textbooks of the 1930s said little or nothing about the reality that Washington and others among the so-called founding fathers owned other people as chattel. Arnautoff not only presented Washington as a slaveholder, but also made it clear that his wealth was based on slave labor. Arnautoff also challenged the way that African Americans were often presented in the 1930s, which was as happy, smiling, and docile. In Arnautoff's murals, the two African Americans who face Washington have an unhappy, even an angry look on their faces. In the other controversial mural, Arnautoff wanted to connect Washington to California. He depicted Washington pointing to the west and explained the remainder of that mural as depicting, and I'm quoting him now, the march of the white race from the Atlantic to the Pacific, unquote. And also as showing, and again I'm quoting, by means of war and peace, the 13 states growing up to 48, unquote. Arnautoff did not celebrate the march of the white race. On the contrary, he made clear that expansion by war had included the deaths of Native Americans. He was also critical of expansion by peace, because his depiction of a white man and an American Indian smoking a peace pipe takes place under a broken tree branch, signifying broken treaties. So Arnautoff's depiction of the march of the white race from the Atlantic to the Pacific is a portrait of the white race engaged in genocide and dispossession of the first people. When New Deal artists depicted people of color, they usually, like Arnautoff, showed them as victims, oppressed people, enslaved people. Relatively few artists in the 1930s showed people of color resisting oppression. That's where Dewey Crumpler's murals come in. His murals, just around the corner from Arnautoff's murals, depict people of color breaking the chains of oppression. And I know he's going to be speaking to you in a short time, but I'm going to quote you for a minute. Dewey has said that his murals and Arnautoff's murals are two parts of the same story, two parts of the same thing, that one cannot be understood without the other. Arnautoff presented the oppression of African Americans and Native Americans. Crumpler presented people of color throwing off their oppressors and taking command of their own destinies. They are two parts of the same story. And I'll be happy to take your questions later if you have any.
Thank you, Dr. Cherny. Right now, I want to introduce a dear, dear friend of mine. He is Dr. Gray Brechin. Gray Brechin is the project scholar at the Living New Deal project at UC Berkeley. He's an amazing man. He's the person who introduced me to this controversy in the first place because he knows, he's been putting together lists, he understands how important the New Deal was in our infrastructure and in art. And so, without further ado, Dr. Gray Brechin.
Thank you. There's another very ambitious New Deal cycle of murals in San Francisco that once raised such passions that it was very nearly destroyed. That's Anton Refregier's Murals of San Francisco History at the old Rincon Annex Post Office down near the Ferry Building. Refregier painted those murals after the war. Towards the end of 26 panels showing the racial and class conflicts that built this city, there's one very dramatic painting of the fascists facing off against the guns of the Allies during World War II. At the top of that panel are blindfolded and gagged prisoners in a concentration camp. In the center is an enormous armored and claw-like hand that is visually echoed across the lobby in another panel, and that's the hand of Sir Francis Drake resting on a globe as he brings European empire to California. At the bottom of that panel, of the fascist panel, are books burning. Anton Refregier was a fellow Russian and a friend of Victor Arnautoff. Both of them used the unprecedented arts patronage of the federal government during the Great Depression. Like other work relief projects of the New Deal, the art projects were meant to help get the country out of depression by putting people back to work. They were not just meant to decorate public buildings, like schools, for example, but do what art ideally should do, that is, to make people think. Both Refregier and Arnautoff pushed the limits. They pushed the envelope of American popular mythology. And both of the artists paid a heavy price for doing so, as whistleblowers so often do. The reactionary Hearst press, that is, the San Francisco Examiner, began attacking Refregier's murals even as he was painting them, so that he said that he had to actually leave work before dark because he was getting so many death threats left on his scaffold. The Examiner alleged that they were communists and that his favorite subject was the Negro, even though there are very few blacks in the murals. 3 was apparently too many for the Examiner. Its campaign, however, had the desired effect, since self-appointed patriots demanded that his murals should be destroyed as soon as they were finished. In 1949, Congressman Richard Nixon wrote to an American Legion commander in Mill Valley that he too was concerned about communist art in federal buildings, concluding that at such time as Republicans took over the executive and legislative branches, as he said, a committee of Congress should make a thorough investigation of this type of art in government buildings with a view of obtaining removal of all that is found to be inconsistent with American ideals and principles. That happy day came in the election of 1952 when suddenly Congressman Nixon was Vice President Nixon, so that in 1953 a congressional subcommittee met to decide whether the Rincon murals should be destroyed for making people think too much. During that day, the congressman put not just art, but California history itself on trial. Among the points of contention was that Refregier had showed California natives to be vigorous, strong, and sympathetic, although, as he said in a letter, he knew that he couldn't be too obvious about what he knew had actually happened to the natives in California, which I never learned when I was going to school here. He left that up to his friend Arnautoff across town at George Washington High School. Arnautoff suggested that there was more to the story of the winning of the West than strong-jawed, clean-shaven movie stars and buxom Miss Kitties. Some people lost everything, including their lives. But losers weren't supposed to be part of the American dream. The day of that trial was quite remarkable. The congressman who wanted to figuratively burn the books because they didn't like what was in them made it abundantly clear that they had made up their minds before the trial, just like the famous trial in Alice in Wonderland or a more recent trial. As a close friend of FDR's, Franklin Roosevelt said, the most serious threat to the success of the public art project of the New Deal is the high emotional level and the low mental caliber of the congressman. Well, the Rincon murals were saved, but just barely, and are today recognized as among the best New Deal art in the United States. They've even been used by the San Francisco School District to teach about diversity and conflict in the building of the city, because I helped them do that. They survived only because San Francisco's political and artistic establishment almost unanimously rallied to their defense then. The difference between today and 1953 is that today the city's political and artistic establishment is almost entirely missing in action, too scared to take a stand against what is the equivalent of book burning by the San Francisco School Board, even as the school district is fiscally on the ropes. Well, shortly after completing the mural cycle, Refregier wrote what he considered to be his masterpiece, his fears for the masterpiece. He wrote this: "Some night, perhaps, men will come with buckets of white paint, and it will take very little time to destroy that which took me so long to make. And in the morning, it will be just like it was 3 years ago. White walls, without colors, without ideas, ideas that make some people so mad and so afraid. Let's make sure that doesn't happen at Washington High School."
It is a high honor and great personal privilege for me to present to you someone who, here in San Francisco, we know very well. A public servant, a concerned citizen, a fine artist, and defeated candidate for vice president, Matt Gonzalez. Matt.
John. Well, I'm famous for losing political races, apparently. No, actually, I did previously serve as president of the San Francisco Board of Supervisors, and I've practiced law for about 3 decades. Done a lot of work in the criminal courts, but also civil rights lawsuits in the state and federal courts, and seen a lot of things. You know, when I first came to this controversy, I was quite surprised even to think that it was a controversy, just to learn that this was happening. And whenever I hear somebody's argument, if I disagree with it, if that's my first take on it, I make an effort to try to understand it, because I question whether or not maybe I'm not getting something right. And I think, you know, there has been an evolution of standards and how we think about things, and it's important to kind of revisit that in your own life. I do not believe that art is so pure that you can never take it down. I think that monuments to public figures and what have you we should revisit them and make sure they're meaningful for our contemporary time and place. With this particular mural, the set of murals, what really shocked me was that folks were being apparently traumatized by the murals. And you know, I want to be open to that, and I want to be sensitive that that could in fact be happening. But I also want to then try to step back from it and say, well, what would be the rule that we adopt if we simply go with that one response to the murals? I mean, are we going to impose a rule that says whenever a group of us are traumatized by something, that we're going to tear that down. I might agree to that because I get traumatized by things at the Hall of Justice every week and would love to tear that down. It also becomes complicated because if your trauma is coming from a place where you're not open to understanding context or understanding history or understanding intention, then how much weight should we give to somebody that wants to be heard, to have their pure emotion heard, but is not willing to do what they expect of everybody else, which is to understand and be open to them. I do not believe the murals are racist. I say that confidently because so many African Americans and Native Americans have stepped forward. Those are experiences I do not have, and they have stepped forward to defend these murals, and that gives me confidence that the way I see them is accurate. I will say this, that I am probably most intrigued and attracted to saving the murals because I love the idea of it being a little piece of subversive radical history. I love the idea that the federal government, at a time that they wanted to paint this patriotic picture of George Washington, inadvertently, I'm sure, hired a communist who painted a story with just enough hints that folks might be able to look at these murals and derive a deeper understanding. It's not that long ago that it was not common knowledge that our founding fathers owned slaves and committed other crimes. And so if we try to think about that historic moment and what Victor Arnautoff did, it's really this beautiful thing, this precious thing, and I believe these murals should be saved if for no other reason to show the society of artists, really, in the era of the WPA, who were still trying to tell the truth against government and the very most powerful. Thank you.
Thank you, Matt Gonzalez. Our next speaker is Susan Cervantes. Susan is an artist and the founder of Precita Muralists Association. Susan, I am very anxious to hear your feelings about the board's decision to permanently cover the Arnautoff murals. Susan Cervantes.
Thank you very much. Thank you all for being here, and I just want to say that Precita Muralists Association, which is an organization that's over 40 years, and we've been doing community murals and we've been preserving murals, and that's what one of our purposes is to do that. And when I heard about this controversy, I thought, well, this is a shame, and that we all agreed, that our organization agrees that these should never be covered up, that they should not be destroyed, or they should be visible and accessible to everyone to learn from, as it has been for many, many decades. And they're definitely masterpieces. And it would be great if, there could be better understanding from the people who feel hurt or not open to understanding, especially the students that still feel victimized by it or traumatized in some way. But we should have some kind of educational curriculum that's around these great murals, including Dewey's, who is also a masterpiece in response to Victor Arnautoff's Life of Washington. And I think that would be the best thing to do, is to have some kind of a curriculum around the murals that would be really, really valuable. And not only that, but I think that if students had the opportunity to actually do a mural, to work with a master muralist and go through the same process, the thought processes, the creative thinking that goes behind actually creating something, they would be transformed. And they would better understand what the murals are, and what the thinking is behind them from the artists. You know, once they put themselves in that shoe, they will be transformed. I know they will, because that's what we see every day when we practice our community muralism. And I think that there needs to be that kind of a program at George Washington and at every other school that has murals. There's murals almost in every school. We have narratives. We make sure that every school receives a description and content of every mural for the purpose of educating the students about the murals that are on their walls. And I think this needs to not be lost. Sometimes there are schools that have murals, great murals, and they don't know what they mean because the words have gotten lost. So I like the idea of having like some kind of a plaque or something that gives a description of the mural that's right next to it so people can actually read it right there. And I know that there was a student I had that was from Washington High School who was an art teacher at Washington High School in the 90s. And she went back to Washington High School and she did murals every semester with her students that went up in the hallways above the lockers to express their own experiences that they were going through. I don't know if those murals are still there. I haven't been able to go through the hallways at all to see any murals. But I think that that was really important. And that, you know, I don't know where the students' work is, but we need to see more of that. We need to see more students' expression in muralism or any other arts so that they can see themselves, work together, build communities with each other, and I think that that's a very important thing and direction to go for these, to resolve this problem that we're having with this one mural. Victor Arnautoff was also in the slideshow that we show at the center when we're starting to teach about mural history. We always show Court Tower murals, and one of the murals in Court Tower is by Victor Arnautoff. And it was a very important piece because it was showing what was really happening, and it was the most controversial one in Court Tower, as I remember. It was about a very affluent-looking man in a trench coat and hat looking at a newspaper stand, and there was a gun being pushed right into his ribs. And in the background were cars being turned over and fire starting because of the longshoremen's strike that was going on at that time. And I think they stopped the Court Tower murals from being painted because of that one scene for a little while. I might be wrong, but that's what I recall. And so I thought that that was really powerful, and that it was just it's the truth. And we have to be able to face the truth, whether it may look pretty or not. So, thank you.
I graduated from Washington High School in the fall of 1966. The principal of Washington High School was a remarkable woman, the second woman to be a principal here in San Francisco. Her name was Ruth Adams. As the controversy developed in the year following my graduation, a decision was made to paint a mural, or murals, as a response. And after a rigorous process, including the Board of Education of the City and County of San Francisco, my friend Dewey Crumpler was commissioned to create the response murals in a proactive answer in preserving the Arnautoff murals. Will you join me, please, in welcoming a dear friend and a great man, Dewey Crumpler.
When I was in high school, I was trying to find out who I was, what the world was really about for me. And so I pursued knowledge on my terms. And one of the ways that I did that was to go to bookstores and buy books. And one of the books I bought was on meditation and Buddhism. And I was very interested in that. So I also was interested in music. And so because I wanted to get into a particular state, to listen to a new photograph player that my mother bought, which was stereo, which was new. And so I went through the record bins and I saw a record called Meditation. And I bought it. Because I thought, yes, I'll be able to sit back and really meditate on this music. And I put it on the phonograph player. And the first thing I heard was, and I jacked it off of my record player. And I went up on the hillside, which was right outside my room because we lived overlooking the city. And I took this record and I threw it as far as I could compel it, and it flew, and then it turned slightly over and it blasted on the street into thousands of pieces, and I felt great because I had destroyed what absolutely made me sick. And then, as the months proceeded, I could not get this sound out of my head. And then I had the record cover, and it said John Coltrane. So I went to the nearest record store, and I bought as much John Coltrane music as I could find, because that sound woke something in me that had I just threw it away because I hated it, I would not have been able to transform into the person who seeked out change. So as I proceeded to come into contact with things that were difficult for me, I took seriously the confusion that it caused. And so when I was confronted with this experience that has just happened with these young students who were frightened and really horrified by images that they didn't understand, I recognized that fear and that concern, not to try to analogize a record with the profound nature of a dead Native American or black people as slaves, but the place where they were in an institution, a school, that is the very place at the very time that you need to be confronted with discomfort, because it is that very discomfort that will build into you that immunity that you need to live in a world of change and dynamic difficulty for the rest of your life. So in that way, those students need to be guided through this process. And even though the school board neglected the point that I made 50 years ago, that unless they permitted and created a plaque to explain those murals, that we would be right back in this space again. Only I thought it would happen 5 or 10 years later. Well, the murals sufficed, but time is irrelevant when information is not available, and young people need information, and they need guidance. And the school board's decision to erase history is not a good one. And thank goodness we have people who have arisen to this task to fight ignorance and erasure, and hopefully change will take place.
I know you saw the images of the response murals, how empowering that Dewey Crumpler created, amazing. You know, Matt mentioned that there's so much of our history that so many of us did not know. I count myself among those. What was taught to me when I was, you know, K through 12, it's pathetic as I learn more. And I'm so happy that my kids, that my daughter Sophie, that she knows so much more about history than I. We went to see Hamilton, and when the show was over, she spent the entire ride home telling me how it's historically inaccurate. And she knew all the reasons that it was historically inaccurate. Still, she loved it, and she can still sing the music. But there were a lot of generations who simply were not taught art, the appreciation of art, what art means, how to understand and appreciate and love what art is, and to protect art. And a lot of us were not taught civics in elementary, middle, high school, and that goes on. And I gotta say, we weren't taught the history. I was talking with some of our guests on my show yesterday, and I can tell you that we were not taught an accurate history of the United States of America. We certainly were not taught the history of our founding fathers, and you know, they who were slave owners and who did perpetrate atrocities. And we certainly did not learn the history of the Native peoples. Right now, I want to introduce to you Enrique Chagoya. And Enrique, I'd like you to talk about how we educate people to respect and honor art and history. Enrique Chagoya.
Thank you. Thank you. Very happy to be here with quite a few fellow artists, former teacher of mine, like Robert Johnson, and with Dewey. It was great to listen to, and Susan Cervantes, and Matt Gonzalez as a friend, and everybody in the panel. It's an honor for me to be here, and thank you everybody for attending to this forum. One thing I just wanted to say, first of all, is maybe something from my own experience, which I learned firsthand through different experiences. And one is that freedom of expression is something that very often we take for granted. And it's always in danger to be affected from different sides of society, from the ultra-right, ultra-left, even the center. And when we think about censorship, it's something that goes beyond just art. It applies to control. It is political control, and it's political power. In Mexico, thankfully I grew up in Mexico City, but I remember most of our school books were full of murals that were depicting the history of the conquest, many of them, And little by little, I began to learn that history is told by those who win wars. History is told, it's been said many times, that is told by the victors of war. But then you have artists, and we love to challenge that history told by the victors of war. And then you have the history told by those who were the victims of those colonial wars or any war that haven't had much of a chance to tell their own histories. Personally, I have been censored twice. My work has been destroyed. The first time it was an exhibition when I was finishing at the San Francisco Art Institute in an exhibition that was called Artists Call Against Intervention in Central America when Ronald Reagan was invading Nicaragua through the Contras. And I did a portrait of Ronald Reagan as Mickey Mouse with Henry Kissinger as Mickey Mouse. Even some of the board of trustees at the San Francisco Art Institute were not happy that the students were organizing an exhibition protesting the war in Central America. And we have exhibitions in the Art Institute, at a local private gallery in downtown where we raise some money for a literacy campaign in Nicaragua. And then an exhibition at the Mission Cultural Center. From all places, I never thought somebody at the Mission Cultural Center, some of the audience, will be offended by my depiction of Ronald Reagan. Somebody came, a Central American came who hated Ronald Reagan and he destroyed my drawing, both sides. And thankfully, I was happy to do an identical copy of that drawing. And now it's part of the locally public art collection, the San Jose Museum of Art, Onset. Another time where I was censored was recently, was not so recently, a few years ago, in 2010. One of my codices, I made these codices very much influenced by the history of the destruction of the indigenous books from Mexico. If you might know, you might recall that in Mexico City, there was the biggest library of pre-Columbian books in the continent, the Library of Texcoco, that was created by an Aztec king, Nezahualcóyotl, who was a poet, who was against human sacrifice. This is something you don't hear even in anthropology documentaries. You hardly ever hear that was an Aztec king at the peak of the Aztec Empire who opposed human sacrifice and who organized poetry festivals. That was King Nezahualcóyotl, which translates as the hungry coyote. King Nezahualcóyotl made this huge library that included books that have knowledge about everything, medicine. They knew how to use penicillin, among other things, something that the Western culture didn't learn until the early 20th century, after I think the First World War. And who knows what else was lost in that knowledge, because there is a very strong hereditary culture in indigenous cultures in Mexico. But besides that, there were books of mythology, there was books of history, of their own histories, there were calculations about their astronomical calendars. And their calendars were more precise even than the Gregorian calendar that was developed even later. But the pre-Columbian calendars were even more precise. They have to adjust their years every 52 years, not every 4 years like we do ourselves. How did they do that? We don't know. Those books are lost forever. So when I read that history, I felt angry. I mean, who wouldn't? But I decided to make art in response, and I decided to make many books based on pre-Columbian books in the format and the content. Well, in 2010, I did a book to protest the sexual abuse of the Catholic Church on children and nuns that has been, until today, without any justice. And on the other hand, in the same book, I criticized the hypocrisy of the institution, not necessarily Catholic people and people of faith, but the institution that doesn't, that discriminate against same-sex marriages, among other things. So anyway, my book was boycotted by a Tea Party member who was in Colorado, and later was in Fox News. The book was presented in Fox News with blurry areas, as if there was not even nudity in my book. There's nothing going on. I decided to mix comic books with heads of icons. And the comic books were sort of like sex, kind of, but soft porn that you find in the bookstores in the streets, basically in the newspaper stands. And there's nothing to censor even in those books. But Fox News presented it as me presenting a religious figure having oral sex. And immediately there was a scandal. Somebody went all the way from Montana. This a woman who was a truck driver drove her truck, 18-wheeler, all the way from Montana to Colorado, get into the museum that was exhibiting this book I mentioned, got into the place with a crowbar, destroyed the frame and destroyed the book. She got tackled by some of the gallery attendants and put in jail, etc. And then I guess somebody should have told her this was a print. It was a multiple. No need to drive all the way from Montana to Colorado because it was an edition. It was an edition of 30 of them. So the only thing this person did was the other 29 books became more valuable. So I thought I was going to invite these people for all of my openings because I'll be in Fox News, I'll have so much publicity. But it got really scary. I began to get like tons of hate mail, threats for weeks. And but finally a pastor from that town, this was Loveland, Colorado, a pastor asked me, what did I mean with that book? And I explained to him the same thing I told you. It's about the Catholic Church not doing anything about the sexual harassment or abuse of children and women in the Catholic Church. It's not a critique of people's faith, it's a critique of the institution. I told him there is no religious figures, there is a collage. There is no Jesus in my work, there's a collage. I put a way to represent corruption, and that's it. I'm just criticizing that. So he wrote back to me and said, thank you for your thoughtful explanation. If you ever come to Loveland, it will be an honor to meet you. And I wrote back to him, I said, I wish most Christians were like you. We became instant friends. But he also got threats from his own congregation. This was an evangelist, 3,000 large congregation. And people walk away from his church. They put his house online, inviting people to destroy it. So, needless to say, that's another form of censorship. So, eventually, people forgot about us. We became instant friends. And then he invited me to do a painting of Jesus for his own church. And I thought, well, I'm not religious myself. But I told him, okay, I'm not religious, but if your congregation, because he risked his life on top of that. If your congregation accepts this painting from me, I'll be happy to do it for free. And then he read or emailed to the congregation, and they, of course, accepted. And then I had to do it. So I did it, happily, by the way. And they loved it, and I thought that's the end of the story. No more hate mail, it's, no more threats. But no, they invited me to go there for an inauguration of the painting because we sent it there, they paid for the shipping. And then I got really scared because in Colorado, they censor you with guns. That's worse. And like Columbine happened there. People kill you even for less. So there was a massacre on a theater when there was a Batman movie a few years ago and 12 people got killed for nothing. In this case, they were going to have a two-first. The pastor, Jonathan Wiggins, was and myself in one place. So, but I went. I was really afraid of going there. And it was one of the most beautiful experiences I had in my life. Nobody tried to convert me. We didn't talk about Jesus. We didn't talk about God. Not on the contrary. They just wanted to meet me, meet the families, their children. And it was beautiful. I'm going to make the story short. It was a happy end. I think the congregation, it was like about 1,000 people there. for their openness. And the other happy end of the story, the museum, the Loveland Museum, they stood to their ground, they defended my work, and because of that, their membership gave them a lot of money. And with that money, they opened a printmaking classroom with facilities like a press for printmaking. So that was a very happy end of the story. But my takeaway from it is controversies, especially when we have so many differences of religion, of gender, or languages, nationalities, we will always have conflict. But conflict could be resolved this way, with that dialogue, getting out of our bubbles and talking to each other. Violence, on the other hand, delays the resolution of conflict. But when the resolution of conflict happens, that's what I will understand as progress. That's when we move ahead. And art controversies are an opportunity to create dialogue. This is the experience of not only myself, other artists like Carol Walker mentions that when she was boycotted by other African American artists because she got a MacArthur, and she was too young for a MacArthur. There were more deserving artists, but she welcomed the opportunity to discuss that with fellow artists, and she also learned from that experiences. So the best thing we could do with this controversy about the Victor Arnautoff mural is to take advantage of it to create an educational moment. And I think we are in this room talking precisely about it. And I got an initiative that is like a $500,000 initiative that I think is going to be to try to promote the education and the explanation of the mural for future generations. So I could talk about it later when we open the mic for discussions. But thank you very much, and that's all I have to say for now.
I'm scripted today, so what I just want to tell you, Enrique, is there is a man sitting here in the audience by the name of David Wyman. And David has been working with a committee and has put together a 6-point program to bring education about these murals into the school. We have no enemies here. We have only friends. And our goal is to make sure that when this is over, those murals are used for proper education. And that's what we want. Now, I have the privilege, and I actually shouldn't do this. In fact, Lope, would you come up here for a moment, please? Now, they script this, okay? And I could read this, but I want Lope to say a word about John Learned, because Lope is the one who really brought him here, and you are the one, Lope, who want to introduce him.
Thank you. I didn't expect to do this. Last summer, John Learned, who's based in Kansas City, Kansas, was so upset at the protests and things he heard that he flew out anonymously, came to San Francisco and spent 1 week, 2 weeks?
1 week.
1 week investigating who are these crazy people who are protesting this work of art. He went everywhere. Guess what? No one would speak to him. No, he tried to go to the school campus. Unfortunately, we're on a seismic retrofit. Couldn't get on the campus. He went back to Kansas and he wrote a letter to Mayor Brown. Mayor Brown passed it to me. I contacted John Learned, and I felt like I met a brother from another mother since last summer, because everything he was talking about, I just said, oh my God, a stranger from Kansas comes in, and he didn't even have the shoes like Dorothy, he just came. And we finally met this week, and he confirmed, just like Dewey and the others, we bonded from something that happened 80 some odd years ago, because we all have the same passion about art or history. So I welcome John Learned. Thank you for coming.
Well, thank you, San Francisco. Being from the Kansas City Chiefs country, it's nice to be out here and see a lot of friendly faces, and everybody's been real nice to me out here. What happened this last summer, a friend of mine, Sarah Carlson, lives out here, and she knows what we are doing with the Chiefs and the Atlanta Braves and out on the reservation, and trying to build on our images that people deem disrespectful my history is I'm an enrolled member of the Cheyenne Arapaho tribe of Oklahoma. I'm a direct descendant of Chief Little Raven of the Arapaho, and I'm also related to Chief Black Kettle, who was murdered by Custer at the Battle of the Washita, Oklahoma. My mother was the first woman elected to run a federally recognized tribe, and she is also a lady who wrote what the government uses today as a description of the American Indian. When a lot of this stuff happened, I was at the University of Kansas, was on an athletic scholarship, and my mother called me and said, "John, I just got elected to run our tribe, and the first thing we're going to do is we're going to go after all these mascots." And I thought, okay, Mom, whatever. Being at KU, Oklahoma was one of our competitors in the Big 8 conference. And 2 weeks later, there was an announcement that Little Red would no longer be on the sideline. So I understood the frustration of her growing up. I understood myself as a little kid in Oklahoma having to go to colored-only bathrooms, to have to stand in line and to always go to the back end of the line in certain instances. But that was back in the 1970s when the Indian Empowerment Act and Self-Determination Acts, so we had a voice. So when Sarah called and said, "What do you think of that?" And I said, "Well, that's wrong." And the reason I think it's wrong for anything like that to be covered up is because it's my feeling that once we start covering up things that we should be talking about, the genocide, the murders, everything that happened, the atrocities that happened to my people, that we lose something as a country. We should be talking about that. And anybody who wants to promote that is also, in a way, committing the same genocide that was started. Because once you take something away, you don't ever talk about it again. And I use an example to anybody here. You've been in neighborhoods, you've seen a grocery store or any kind of store that's there, and everybody said, "Oh, that's so-and-so's been there forever." They come in, tear it down. 2 or 3 years later, you ask, "I can't remember, but there was something there. What used to be there?" And that's how I feel about once we start taking the opportunity to talk about American Indians, talk about our history in a real way, not this kind of made up, like everything was great. It wasn't. And so when Sarah called about this, I said, I got to do something about this because I have been working with the chiefs. And when I started working with them, all the hate mail, this you were talking about, I got all kinds of stuff, and we hadn't even done anything. We just said we're gonna start working with the Kansas City Chiefs. And so everybody knee-jerk reaction, without waiting to see what happens, without letting the process play out. I was getting hate mail and all kinds of stupid stuff. And so here we are 7 years later. I get calls all the time from Indians from around the country wanting to participate in what we're doing. The Atlanta Braves have reached out and said, "Hey, can you help us?" Because what it does is it opens it up an opportunity to share what's important to us and to build up what, back in the day, what I always thought, when they use an image like the Washington Redskins or any of these others, they did that not to be disrespectful, but they respected the Indians enough to say, that's a proud, dignified, will to win, never give up. That's how I feel when I see those. And I think that we need to use this opportunity of this dead Indian who is now alive because of the people who didn't want this to be, who thought, let's get rid of it. We've got a great opportunity here now, and I've heard a lot of good ideas here that I think George Washington High School could be a leader in the country and working and solving some of these problems. That's what we've done with the Chiefs. One of the games that we have a long snapper. His name's James Winchester, and he's a member of the Choctaw Nation. And on the radio, he made a play, and the radio announcer said, "This is a tackle by James Winchester, pride of the Choctaw Nation." And I got probably about 24 calls saying, "Johnny, we never thought we'd hear that. We never thought anybody would shout out our tribe at a Chiefs game." And so this is a great opportunity. And I want to thank the people that did raise a stink about this, because it's given us all a chance to come together and really talk about this. I went and saw the murals yesterday. I'd only seen them in paper, just small. They're magnificent. But it also tells a whole story, and you have to see them to get that story. It's like going to a movie and you're seeing the whole show. Oh, but that one scene, I didn't like that. That needs to be destroyed. Well, that one scene holds the whole story together. And that's how I feel about this. I really appreciate everybody coming out. You guys taking the time out of your day to come and listen to us. But it's given us an opportunity. And I want you to think, as American Indians, we want our history told. We want the story of what happened to us told. And this gives us a great chance to do that. I mentioned to, I'll be real short here, but I mentioned to a friend of mine, if that had been a Jewish man, woman laying on the ground, and those were soldiers walking by him, I think every Jewish person in the country would say, don't paint over that. Don't get rid of that. Tell the story. Tell what happened to us. Don't forget us. Don't let anybody forget. But as soon as we throw something on that picture, 2 years from now it'll be over. No one will be talking about it. But we have a chance to talk about it for a long time. Thanks.
Thank you, John. I want to mention that John's cousin is Harvey Pratt. Harvey was called into my show yesterday, and he's right now almost finished with his National Native American Veterans Memorial on the National Mall in Washington, D.C. Yeah, exactly. And one of the things that he said on the air that gave me goosebumps, and I don't think I'll ever forget it, he was talking about a commemoration of what he referred to as a battle, but it was actually a massacre that happened at Sand Creek, wasn't it? Yeah. So it's at Sand Creek, and he was describing the symbolism in this memorial, this artwork that he was developing. And one of the things he described was that there were survivors, and that the survivors said that they watched as people were being slaughtered, and that particularly there was one woman who cried out, "Do not forget us."
Yeah.
It harkens back to the Holocaust, the Jews in the Holocaust. Never forget. And for a lot of us, we didn't even know. How do we forget until we know? And I didn't know I was going to get emotional about that, but I am. I also want to tell you that my daddy's from Oklahoma, and that all my life, until 6 months ago I was told that I had Native American blood. I have 7 brothers and sisters. Every one of us said, we bragged about it. We were in school, we would tell people. My mom had a picture of my father's grandmother, a beautiful woman in what appears to be traditional garb. She's got that picture in a scrapbook because that's our relative. Until Sophie got 23andMe as a gift. You know how much native blood we have? 0! And I'm still wondering who that woman is and why she's in our scrapbook. But right now I want to introduce you. It sounds a little bit like Elizabeth Warren, but at least she had some.
And Pat, you'd have my vote for sure.
I met Barth Chief Eagle Robinson yesterday, and he is our next speaker. He's from the Rosebud Sioux tribe in South Dakota. And Barth, if you would please talk with us about your concerns about ignorance and misunderstanding as it relates to the Arnautoff murals.
Hello. I'm a guest here, and I'm honored to be here, to have a voice, and have this mural have a voice, but also your voice. You know, we say where I come from, there's many voices, and that's the sacred part is in this dialogue and forum is, I want to hear from you. I know this is a local issue. I come from afar, but when I started looking into this, I saw how powerful it was and how big of an opportunity it is for a high school here in a prominent, affluent area that might not know the issues of what goes on in Indian country. And throughout my life, I've worked on several controversial issues and tried to bring enlightenment to it, and what you would say a win-win, maybe a compromise. And throughout life, you have very few times to do something great, to pivot and have that opportunity. And with myself, I was working, and this comes from a Native American platform, but one of my colleagues here, I reached out to Mr. Tom Ye, who's Taiwanese, American Taiwanese, and I told him, I said, you know, something really powerful happened a couple years ago, but it was in real time when I told him this. I said, Taiwan, you elected a woman president through a democratic process. And I explained how powerful that was through how we gave democracy and refined democracy through the Iroquois Confederation. And we gave that, and it's embedded in our Constitution today. But more importantly, I told him how sacred a woman is in our culture. A woman brought us a pipe, and that was our religion. And I said, you know, even the United States government isn't honoring this. And I was so impressed by President Sioux that the first thing she did when she took office is she got up and she had a reconciliation visit with the indigenous people of Taiwan that they pushed aside when Chiang Kai-shek, after the Communist Revolution, when the Chinese moved to Taiwan. And she honored that. And so I wanted to get a group of Native American leaders to go over and honor her. And I feel that you're at that point today, you can do something so powerful through a curriculum, and you don't realize what you have. And the voice you have. And this artist, Victor Arnautoff, it reminds me of a saying that there was another immigrant artist that carved it's the largest monument in the world, the crazy horse monument. He is carving in the Black Hills. It's a little bit controversial because that's our treaty land. But he says, you know, when legends die, there's no more dreams. And when the dreams are gone, there's no more greatness. And I just want to let you know that your community and you people today have that opportunity to create a public-private institution with the African American and Native American heritage, dreams, and their vision, and share that with the world. And you might be naive to the issues of what's going on in our communities, in indigenous communities, but that's the beauty of it, because you come with that clear mind, clear eyes, and blank slate, and with your dreams and visions, you can make that change. And I'd be honored to answer your questions, visit with you.
Actually, what we're going to do, if you're done, is, and let's give him a big hand, shall we?
Just like say, when ending, Mitakiwe-o-san, we are all related.
Thank you. The script, which was carefully prepared,
And which you've gone off of.
yes, of course, says that an open discussion with all the speakers is now appropriate. and we're delighted to do that. Pat and I are supposed to moderate, but this is your time. So I first of all want to thank all of the panelists.
Hey, John, before we go to the questions from the audience, I'd like Dr. Cherny just a minute to make a statement about when George Washington High School was dedicated initially.
Oh, great. Dr. Cherny?
That wasn't what I wanted to talk about. But
Whatever it was he wanted to talk about is what I meant.
just within the last few days, I understand, George Washington High School has been added to the Historic American Building Survey in Washington. The National Park Service approved the documentation. And it was approved on the basis of it being a historic building by a prominent architect, filled with a wealth of art, including the New Deal art by Arnautoff, the art in the library, the absolutely spectacular frieze at the head of the athletic field by Sergeant Johnson, who is one of the very few African-American artists working in the WPA, and also Dewey Crumpler's murals. And the survey even includes some student murals that appear scattered throughout the building.
Thank you.
So what we'd like to do, there are microphones on either side, and those of you who have questions, please line up and let's have those questions. And we're delighted. May I just also add on a personal note?
There's one right here and one right over there near the stage.
I just want to add on a personal note. I have been president of the Alumni Association since 1974. I've been involved repeatedly, and I've never been as proud as I am today of this gathering and this discussion, and I want to thank you all for that.
So do we have any members of the audience who have questions that they would like to pose to any of the panelists?
So with the announcement of the National Park Service designation, does that change the impact of the murals being covered?
This is a significant accomplishment. Just to give you some perspective, normally an application takes about 2 or 3 years, and our group of expert volunteers did it in 5 months. I have to tell you, Annette Melville and others. Annette, are you here by any chance? Excellent. I love her dearly for her work, and everyone else, Teresa Pilati, Merritt, et cetera, but this sort of shapes it, so the next step for me and us would be to reformat the application, because it's already been documented, it's already in hard copy, and for some weird reason, it will not be on the National Park Service website till the fall. I don't get this, but it'll be there eventually. But we're now going to take it and apply for the National Registry. I forget the actual term. It's another wing of the National Park Service, and that would make it a permanent landmark status, federal landmark status. And that would hopefully...
And would that offer protection then?
That would offer the ultimate protection. Yeah.
Excellent.
Steve Zeltzer, I'm with Labor Fest and the Labor Video Project, and we've been documenting this whole struggle. During Labor Fest, we had another event which unfortunately was disrupted by people who they disrupted in the middle of Dr. Cherny's presentation. But actually it worked out well, because that incident led to a lot of people saying, what is going on? And I want to thank the people who are opposed to it. I don't agree with their position that they should be destroyed, but as the speakers have said, they've made this a political issue. They've made this a history issue, a history lesson. The question we have to ask ourselves, though, in San Francisco, why is it that 320 public school teachers signed a petition saying that the mural should be destroyed? That's an important question for us in education and people who want teachers who have this history. And second of all, why is this taking place at the same time that with all the billionaires in San Francisco, they're talking about laying off teachers? And they don't have the art programs that we need, and we don't have signage on these important artworks. So those are really questions that have to be addressed. So why? I think the fact that there wasn't signage on these paintings in the beginning was because if there had been signage on it, I think the right wing would have said, let's destroy it then, in the 30s. But today, there should be signage on it, on that history, for the students to know what they were watching and the history of it. So that's...
And the history of the artist, too. This was, you know, these murals were not a glorification of the flaws of Washington. These were not a glorification. This was just an example of history. Do any of our panelists?
I want to tell you a short story. Probably about 30 years ago, the Fine Arts Museums of San Francisco was given a beautiful turn-of-the-century painting, which you could go to the museum and see on view. And it was a view of Yosemite Hot Springs. It was a beautiful, small American landscape painting. And the frame that was on the painting was also contemporary to the oil. It was probably around 1890 to 1900. And the beautiful gold leaf handmade frame. And in the corner of the four corners of the frame was a swastika. The swastika, of course, was not there, had anything to do with National Socialism and the Nazis. It had to do with the American Indian symbol. This was decades before the Nazis stole that symbol from world culture and used it for their own purposes. And one of the well-meaning trustees at this acquisition meeting said, well, I think it's a beautiful painting, but the first thing we should do after accepting this gift is destroy the frame. And I said to myself, oh my God. No, you don't destroy the frame, you explain the frame. You explain what that is toward culture. Of course we know the swastika has been inbred into our minds, having to do with what happened in World War II and all of that, but this particular frame was long before that, and it needs to be explained. The good news is they did not destroy the frame. It is still on that painting today. You can go to the Dion and see it. The bad news is, this was not my department, I was Prince Strong's photographs. I pleaded with the museum to have an explanatory label to explain that frame so people would understand exactly the context. The picture's on the wall, the frame is still on the picture, there is no label. So, in terms of the fine arts museums, I think they still are falling short because education is crucial. Education to that painting at the Dion Museum today, and in terms of the murals at George Washington High School, there needs to be explanation. And, in fact, there needs to be the contrary point of view. The murals stand for themselves. The murals tell the story that he wanted to tell. Yes, it's subjective, but they tell, to my mind, the truth. And of course, if there's a contrary feeling, there should be a contrary point of view on an explanatory label. But the way you get through to the public, the way you educate them, is through education, not through censorship.
Dr. Cherny.
Dr. Cherny, hold on a second. I need to clarify a couple of things. There's been discussion about signage for the murals, and this current board has either ignored or is ignorant of the fact that previous boards had already said there should be signage up on those, I would say in the 70s, I believe, in the early 80s, and they never did this. So it's not like they haven't been told. We had this documented in documents that said that we should put these up, and they never did. And so think about what that means.
I did want to thank Steve Zeltzer for all of the work he has done on this issue. He's really been a very important supporter for saving the murals. And to slightly expand on what Lope just told you, Zaretta Gooseby, who was the first African American to serve on the San Francisco School Board, worked out through negotiations with the students in the late 1960s a compromise. And part of that was that there would be additional murals. And part of it was that there would be signage that the students would help to create. And it's now 50 years overdue for the school board to keep their part of that bargain.
Sir.
Oh, hi. My name is Ben Wood. I just wanted to first say that I'm in favor of keeping the murals in view, and I know a lot of you guys, and I appreciate having this event. But I also want to offer a little critique. I think that it could have been possible for you to include local Native people. There are local Native people here in the audience who haven't been acknowledged by those people that were invited or acknowledge them. So I think it's appropriate to get their point of view and well, to acknowledge their presence.
Ben, I want to thank you. I do want everybody to know that one of the leaders in this effort, and you saw his picture in the Chronicle online edition, is Tamaka Bailey, who has been in the forefront of this effort. His mother has been ill, and he is not here today because of that, but he would have been the local person with whom we are most familiar.
We have local Ohlone people.
Oh, wonderful.
People of Ramaitush Ohlone heritage and other Ohlone heritage here, and I think that it's really important to first acknowledge the folks from that group and have them weigh in and participate in this process.
We agree. Can I also point out, Ben, who is a leading artist here in San Francisco, has been working on an interpretive project for the murals to make them come alive. And I won't have you explain it now unless you want to spend a minute on it. But Ben has been absolutely phenomenal, and we appreciate everything you do.
Right, yeah, no, I understand that. I'm grateful. But anyway, I just wanted to offer that critique. I'm in favor of what you're doing, but it would be great to have
Are
other
those
voices.
people here, Ben, that we can get them to speak now?
I don't know if they'd be willing to participate. You know, it's up to them.
Could you explain your concept while you're here?
The question is, can Ben explain his concept?
So there's various approaches that you could have to mediate the murals, either through having other artists participate, those potentially from Precita Eyes, or those of younger artists who feel marginalized and alienated by the murals, to have them augmented in some way, either by creating a work of art or to have some augmented interpretation of the murals, or to have a projection or interactive or video installation in conversation with the murals, in order really to bring out the issues that folks are really feeling and feeling affected by the stories in the murals, in order to bring them to life and have a discursive, more critical view of what's going on in the murals.
And that's what Ben has been working on, and we will continue working with you on that.
Right.
Let me say, if I might.
Yeah, go ahead.
Just say that I made this point about updating the murals by maybe removing that statue of George Washington into somewhere else in the school, and putting a kiosk, a digital kiosk, a digital framework in that corner, so that students could interact with it on their phones and also on the screen, that would really tell contemporary stories as well as explain the mural, so that there's an updating of both technology. So muralism sort of is still a part of the 20th century, but digital muralization is important too. And maybe in that way, there could be an ongoing changing dialogue that changes over time and is not trapped in the solidity of the wall space. And in that way, I think that would be a great addition, and I've made that point on several occasions.
I think that there's 13 separate murals. It's not just the one mural, as Robert says, and it would be great to have different groups, as you've done, Dewey, participate in reflections on each separate, or a number of those separate murals, the 4 major murals. The Indigenous, the mural depicting an Indigenous warrior laying face down has not yet been addressed, and it needs to be addressed in some way, whether that's by interpretive panels.
I totally disagree with that, because I designed the mural that I made 50 years ago, so that immediately as you walk through the door, you are greeted with a Native American holding up Turtle Island and is not in any way lying down. Right underneath him is contemporary Native American warriors that took over Turtle Island, and they are there. And he is a archetype. And that came out of arguments by students who wanted that relationship. So everything that's in that mural, in Arnautoff's mural, is addressed in the murals I made. Now, the contemporization of that, because every generation wants to include their voice, and that's why I'm saying you could change that. But I disagree. That Native American is part of the reason the murals that I made were made, because the African American students were not just concerned about those slaves, but they were concerned about the way Native Americans were depicted. And that's how the other panels, both the Latin American panel and the Native Asian American panel was created. They were direct relationships to some of the problematics of the murals the problems that were invoked by Arnautoff's murals. So I don't agree that they weren't addressed. The problem is that they weren't addressed with the information that was provided by me in a key that explained everything in my murals that was to be placed in the school. And they refused to do it because my having painted the murals cooled down the controversy for 43 years. So that's what happened. But I took that Native American relationship extremely seriously. And to this day, I give homage to the peoples whose land I stand on. And that was absolutely the case when I was a kid and made those murals.
Thank you. Ma'am?
At the school board, thing that I mentioned was that I believe that the artist must have read Tocqueville, because the image that's very controversial of, the settlers coming and the dead Indian could have come right out of Tocqueville. It's like an illustration of what he said was happening, to the American Indians at the time. In the first place, that he was at the Mississippi when the Choctaw arrived, and his description of it is like the Armenian Death March. It's just, tragic. He's understood to have really understood our culture and history and what was happening at the time better than we do. And he had an insight, which I would never, until I read it, have even thought of, in which he said what happened to the American Indians, it was astonishing because it was like this bloodless removal. And what happened was that the settlers moved onto the land and they destroyed the economy just by being there. The animals left or died, went west, and the Indians had to move west or starve to death. And so we had all of these treaties, the bloodless treaties and so forth, And if people understood it that way, it's like this wonderful insight. Those are not exactly what you would call heroic figures. They're, this abstract force is the way he depicted them, Now, when I went to Washington, I would have to say the only insensitive word I ever heard when I was there was meet us at the DI, that kind of thing. But other than that, which is not okay, nobody thought about it then, that was a school that was like the beacon on the hill of racial, you wouldn't even say racial understanding, whatever, all togetherness. It was a coach who was the principal at the time, And we were not taught brotherhood or, what would you say, non-discrimination, whatever. We were taught we were perfect. We're all one. We're all here together. Not one person would ever have dreamed of saying anything or even thinking anything negative about the other people. We're all one. Our stars, our star, athletes, our star singers, whatever they were, or our officers in the class officers, the school officers, everybody, we never thought about, or the kids we hang out with, we never thought about that we should be like in racialized groups. I was horrified going to the school board hearings. It was like going to a Trump rally. It's like having gone from what was perfection, absolute perfection, to having gone to this encouraged by educators. And when they could be using the opportunities, as I mentioned to them, like having people from the outside, apart from the teachers teaching history, which would be a good thing. I have to say our history books were not very enlightening at the time. I became a history major and then, understood more. But they could have people from the outside, like the Spanish teacher when I was there had somebody come in from a consulate who told us about the suffering of the Palestinians and about, the greatness of Arab Spain, and it made a mark on me that I can never forget. I cannot tolerate, the kind of, horrific prejudice against people who are Muslim and so forth. And all they have to do is things like that instead of whipping up this kind of racialized stuff. My final comment is the worst idea in the world is having an initiative. A ballot measure, worst idea, because that's just going to add, all of this kind of racialized stuff, the animosity, and some of our elected officials, especially under ranked choice voting, are like, what would you say? They were elected by practically nobody, and they're not exactly the greatest minds, and they're going to be having to choose sides, and what sides are they going to choose, I mean, the ones who are saying that right now, the elected leaders who are saying right now that we need to get rid of the NAACP leadership and stuff like that, we're just going to have a whole lot of unnecessary, horrific, racialized stuff that could be avoided. We could not lose in court. And it is, not impossible you could lose this other way, and at least it will create a lot of, like all of our political leaders having to choose sides, and are they going to want to choose sides against, these poor, sensitive, injured people?
Can I just say, as a disclaimer, we have never wanted this politicized, nor do we want it politicized. And the talk which you hear of the possibility of a ballot measure in November of 2020 is our hope that this forum will provoke our elected public officials to reconsider so that the recourse for saving the murals goes back where it belongs, in the hands of the Board of Education, and we hope they do the right thing.
I just want to say that sometimes when you have a situation like this, rather than seeing rancor and anger, miscommunication, you try to look at a situation, a controversy, which we have here, and try to come to some positive solution. I made not one, not two, but 3 calls and conversations with the Chief of Staff of Mayor London Breed. And I said, rather than see what the school board had done is tentatively schedule hundreds of thousands of dollars, which the school board cannot afford, to work towards the destruction of these murals. And I might add, I might make a very important point, that this idea that they've come up with this compromise to only board them up, that was not a compromise with the members on the stage here, that was a compromise with themselves. That's not a compromise, that's a retreat. They got so much heat on them. But back to the Chief of Staff, I spoke with the Chief of Staff and I said, your boss, the Mayor of San Francisco, her job, the Mayor of San Francisco is supposed to take people in a room quietly, behind closed doors, not publicly, and work out a solution. As you all probably know here, Mayor Breed hasn't taken a stand. She's under her desk on this, which is not a sign of leadership. And my point that I made to the chief of staff in those conversations, I said, rather than spend hundreds of thousands of dollars trying to destroy these murals, why can't we together, especially even with our organization, try to raise some money for a permanent endowment which would use the proceeds, the interest from that endowment, to sponsor, let's say, a Historical Awareness Week once a year, where you could bring in speakers, films, and really deal with this sense of history, this sense of controversy, this sense of discussion, which these students desperately need. These students, with all due respect, there's so much that they don't know. And what is it? It's a high school. That's where education is supposed to be taught. And instead of spending hundreds of thousands of dollars to try to destroy these things, put some money aside, work together, put the money aside, and have it be a permanent endowment to use it as a proactive thing, and have this controversy not end up in rancor, but end up in something positive. And of course, I never heard back from the mayor's office, never heard back.
Sir.
Yeah, very quick question, and I'll just set it up by saying that I didn't want anyone to get the impression from a previous question that the local Native American leadership wasn't actively involved in the issue, because from my personal involvement, the current poet laureate of San Francisco, a Native American woman who's been very active on local issues, including issues of public art, has been very supportive of the efforts of this group and these speakers. And I know that she's of a mind to continue to assist. And, so in light of that, and this whole evolution of public awareness on the issue, my question to the panel is, where do you think the political winds are blowing at the Board of Education? They took one position, they took another position. Things are evolving. National recognition of the historic importance of the art is there. Politics is a moving target. There are elections coming up. I'd like to ask those with political experience on the panel where they think the mindset of the current board members are.
I think that's you, Matt.
That's you, Matt.
Well, I think it's a really challenging issue. To Robert's point about the mayor, though, I want to defend Mayor Breed for a moment, which I have probably never done. You know, she's not required to take a position on this matter. Robert's correct to say that she could play a role in trying to bring a resolution to the matter. She may have chosen not to because she is undecided in what side she's taking. Or she could very well believe that the school board, that this is a matter properly to be decided by the school board, that it's not something for the Board of Supervisors or the mayor to decide. I don't know enough about the current membership of the Board of Education to really answer your question. I will say this, though, that my own personal experience in politics, how to say it, you know, there are many times that I found myself staying up late, poring over some audit of some city department, or having, you know, 3-4 hour long meetings, trying to get something right about what should happen in the fire department, at the Public Utilities Commission, what have you. Nobody ever calls you up after those meetings to say, Matt, thanks a lot for, you know, putting in all those hours on that issue that you may have no interest in personally, but the obligation to serve includes working on issues that maybe you don't know that much about and you have to get up to speed. This particular issue, I know, affects politicians when people feel so strongly about something that they put together a group of people to lobby on an issue. It is very hard to stand up to to that group and to say, I'm not in agreement with that, or I'm not sure about that. I remember when I was on the Board of Supervisors, the Police Officers Association came to my office because they wanted to adjust their retirement benefits. And they wanted to be able to get something like 85 or 90% of their pay at retirement at the age of 55 or something like that. And I said, wow, I mean, is this even financially feasible? And they said, oh yes, we have the actuarials. I said, well, where are they? And they said, well, we'll get them to you. I said, okay. I was the only public official in San Francisco that did not support their measure. Everybody supported it. I did not even actively campaign against it. I simply I hadn't seen the evidence that it was viable. They sent mail to District 5 that I represented, that included the Western Addition and Haight-Ashbury, telling my constituents that I opposed public safety. Not that I had stood up to ask a simple question of where are the actuarials. The moral of the story being, I think it's that kind of pressure of the crowd that causes some people to fear having more openness to trying to reach a resolution. I think the responsibility lays with the Board of Education to come up with a solution.
With censorship back in our country is that it takes more subtle ways. In other places, they go straight for a straightforward ban on ideas. Either when you have a theocracy somewhere, or one political system, dictatorship somewhere else, that's what happens. Here, banning something is not popular. So what do people do for censorship? Many things. And the problem is that many people who practice censorship, they don't see themselves as censors. And even ourselves, sometimes we might question ourselves when we don't agree with some ideas, how much we are not seeing ourselves as censors as well. But it takes so many subtle forms and even creative forms that we have to be aware of. Censorship for me, it could be, and there is actually, I wanted to mention this, the National Coalition Against Censorship. You could look for them online. They have a scary list of things that are practiced in censorship in this country, among other places. And also they have and that's very scary because when you read it, it's like they are telling people how to censor people. But the second half is a manual for freedom of expression. So I highly recommend this, the National Coalition Against Censorship. Among many things they list that censor in a very subtle way is people that go, oh, you have to have a balanced discussion. That happens to places like public radio. You have to have a balanced discussion. You have to invite both sides. Otherwise, you won't have a chance to say your point of view. In other places, it's triggers. This whole issue happened because of a trigger. So that's very much used as a form of censorship. Another form of censorship could be the children. Think about the children, what the children are going to say. And a lot of censors hold or hide behind the children. I wonder how many people actually base anything that they say based on what the students at the Washington High School actually think about. Apparently, I mean, I saw at least pictures of some students that they don't even care about the news. They were reading their cell phones, their hair, and they don't even look at the murals. But anyways, triggers in children are forms of censorship. Funding is a great source of censorship. That keeps a lot of institutions really worried, major institutions. I mean, you could talk about the Metropolitan Museum, the Museum of Modern Art, all of them. Their board of trustees are more afraid of losing funding than being afraid of being too apolitical in the art they represent. But in any case, all of these forms of censorship come from everywhere, from the ultra-right, all the way from Hitler burning books, or even from the conquest with the destruction of Native American books and art and languages and culturicide that happened for Native American cultures all across the continent. All the way to the ultra-left, like Stalin and communist parties that create situations like the Cultural Revolution in China. I compare the actions of the San Francisco Board of Education as some kind of mini cultural revolution. And somebody said, well, that happens when a government is censoring the people. So what is the San Francisco Board of Education? That's the government, and it's censoring the people. So it's a cultural revolution light, maybe, but still censorship. So anyway, so I just wanted to say, there is a lot of very subtle ways in which we are censored. And I think maybe we should question ourselves, what would be the limits of freedom of expression, if anything? Perhaps violence, or inviting to violence might be something not accepted. Harassment, like verbal harassment, verbal abuse perhaps, I mean, things like that, that might not be considered freedom of expression. But art, a mural, a book, a film, the product of ideas, the freedom of our creativity, the freedom of our imagination, that's what deserves freedom of expression, no matter the context. Thank you.
Thank you.
I'd like to say,
I just want to say, those are elected officials. And if there are any of those elected Board of Education officials here in the House today, they should stand up right now.
Are there any here? Do we have any?
Anyone? So let me just share with you a note that Enrique brought up. One of the first national organizations that came to protest was the National Coalition Against Censorship. It's a 56 organization, founding organization, including Planned Parenthood, ACLU, all the entertainment and drama guilds, the Directors Guild I'm a member, which I've been a member for over 40 years. They have been proactive. We speak regularly. They're here to support us. They're fearful that if we don't stop this, then what next? What other place is not appropriate for them?
Sir.
Hi. My name is Emil de Guzman, and I want to thank the panel for this very important moment, because I think our democracy needs to hear this point of view. Our country is faced with incredible challenges, and I think all of us all know about it. But I think that enlightenment, the education, our constitutional right of freedom of expression are very key to pass on. Our young people need to understand these things, because I understand them better today than I did when I was a much younger student at George Washington High School years ago. Our artists are really, to me, the real historians. And I say that because I go to a lot of the museums and I see the artists and what they painted. And there are a lot of things that I've seen that I don't agree with, but it was at the times in which they wrote or they painted or produced their work that just captured that moment, that period when they were painting. And so, it's important to really put all this in perspective, because there's so much more work to do. There are a lot of people here, but there have to be more that I said are going to have to get out there and do more to explain just what these times are, what George Washington High School and the mural really represents. And I really, again, I appreciated everything that I learned in this by all the people who spoke. One thing I do want to ask is what about this city? What are we going to do to try to turn this around with the Board of Education? And what do you have in mind in order to be able to get maybe the voters involved in order to turn this decision around? Or is it necessary, given some of the the awards that I think that we were mentioned on the...
The designations,
on the
right.
Yeah. Does that in any way sort of mean that the Board of Education's position is not? So I push that up.
I want to just answer quickly, because many people have comments. We're working on it. We welcome the opportunity to meet with the Board of Education. So far, they have not been interested. A letter was dispatched to the board yesterday outlining a proposal that addresses the very issues that you are suggesting. The Committee for Public Art is part of the movement, which is saying very simply that if there is a need to go to the ballot, we will. And the hope is that there will be a solution which prevents, and I want to be very clear about this, if it goes on the ballot, it's going to cost a lot of money, a lot of time, a lot of effort. We would rather see the time, the effort, and the money used for the very things that have been talked about here, which is educational opportunity, endowments, and so forth at Washington High School. So I want to be crystal clear. We will fight to preserve the murals, but we would rather have a situation where all of us can agree, go to the Board of Education, as we have just done, and you'll be reading about that, with a positive proposal so that we can, in fact, do what was intended.
Mishmituhis, Kanrakat Canyon, Coyote Woman, Sayers Roots. I am a Mutsun Ohlone individual. My ancestors have always been from this Bay Area region. However, I'm a Southern Ohlone. Right here, right now, we are in Yelamu. The first language of this land is Ramaytush. And this tokenistic behavior of grabbing a... let me preface this. This space is not safe for myself or other Indigenous peoples that happen to have a different perspective than you. This particular conversation is very one-sided. There's an agenda, there is bias, and in a lot of your arguments there have been dismissals, multiple. That being said, I am a being who is an artist who appreciates keeping art. However, as an Indigenous woman raised in the Bay Area that believes we're all extinct, I have to spend my entire life, if I am going to be adamant and passionate about truth and history, where I don't get paid. I don't get any of this. However, I'm able to impact the community on an ongoing basis. And you're saying it's been 50 years since this art piece has been created, yet no one has created said opportunity of educating the public. Why? Because they're not getting paid in this capitalistic system? And Indigenous peoples are not a monolithic culture. There are over 500, almost 600 nations that are federally recognized. That being said, Turtle Island is not my belief. So inclusion of a monolithic pan-Indian approach is still exclusionary. This space is not safe, so I'm glad relatives did not stand up. However, how many of you recognize the word BIPOC? Black, Indigenous, person of color. How many, anyone who identifies as a person of color, can you please stand in this audience, please? Do you identify as a person of color? Yeah. All right, and I'm sorry, relatives. Please sit down. Continue standing if you identify as an Indigenous person. Sorry, relatives. I want to know how many Indigenous people are here in this room. Yeah, thank you. So, one, there are Indigenous leaders here in the Bay Area that are very active and proactive in honoring truth and history. I am one of them, of many. I am not dismissing the voices that are shared here today. However, this title of this event was very misleading. I thought I was coming to a discussion. This is one-sided. And it's very aggressive in using civility politics to silence voices. It is not a safe space here. I am emboldened with passion because I have been hurt by repetitious acts of cultural genocide. And it continues. Where are the Indigenous voices prioritized in honoring truth and history? This Western settler colonial agenda that, yeah, letters were made and people did or didn't dismiss it. Your event was barely promoted in many circles, like, oh, well, if people show up, they might show up. So I ask you, when you're talking about preservation of this and the hopes of truth and history be shared, be it kiosk, I love augmented design and art. I can get so many ideas of like, find the blah, blah, blah in this, have a treasure hunt in this, use your mobile device and find this image here, and here's a big narrated conversation, record someone talking about it on site, have amazing VR footage, all of these opportunities, why don't they exist? 50 years, why haven't the students in that school been educated about it in the way that we keep hypothesizing and projecting? Do it. But at first, can you honor truth and history of this space and place? Indigenous protocol has always taught myself and my Indigenous community members that you should always recognize the land that you are on and recognize that there is a history, a long-held history of Indigenous peoples who are stewards of these lands since time immemorial, whose voices and perspectives deserve an opportunity to be presented. Thank you.
Thank you so much for your passionate and honest opinion and feelings. I agree with you so much that the target, to a great extent, that you have raised goes directly back to previous and current school boards that have not pushed for a proper agenda of teaching these histories. These murals are just a touch of what needs to be done. I mean, as Dewey Crumpler said earlier, there's so much about America that is good, but there's so much about America that has sadness about it, has mistakes that need to never be forgotten. A few years ago, I organized an exhibition that I don't think I could have ever organized at the Fine Arts Museums of San Francisco. It was an exhibition of Ansel Adams. But the exhibition I wanted to do was not an exhibition they would have wanted to do. They would have wanted an exhibition about Ansel Adams' beautiful photographs of Yosemite. That's not the exhibition I did. My exhibition was the photographs that Ansel Adams did of Manzanar when he went up there and took photographs of the Japanese American camps. And that is a piece of history that most people don't know about. Ansel Adams took those photographs and he was censored. He couldn't show the barbed wire, he couldn't show the turrets, he couldn't show the guards. And you know what he did? He showed the pictures of the Japanese Americans in Manzanar being American citizens, publishing a newspaper, playing baseball, growing crops, showing them that they were not our enemy, they were our citizens, they were our fellow citizens. He published a book during the war in 1944 called Born Free and Equal to tell the story about what was happening to these people. It was before the war was over, it was 1944. His book, the book was burned. He was called the Jap Lover, Ansel Adams. We know about Ansel Adams as the great conservationist, but Ansel Adams was a great hero in trying to tell the truth and trying to get that story out. That's the sort of story that should be part of the curriculum of the San Francisco school system. They should know about Ansel Adams, the conservation, but they also should know about Ansel Adams, the man who stood for the Japanese American citizens during the war. Franklin Roosevelt was one of the great presidents of the 20th century, but he has this terrible mark on his record, which deserves to be there, about his horrible miscalculation, mistreatment of these fellow citizens. And you can say the same thing about what happened to African Americans in the history of this country and Native Americans. This is the responsibility of the school board to put this part of history on the pages. We're lucky we're in San Francisco because we're in Texas. They are doing just, they put the history of the United States in the wood chipper down there. In terms of, they want their books specifically censored in the state of Texas to conform to their very, very, very narrow and conservative views. Thank God we're in San Francisco, but let's put it right. Let's put the ball right back in the court of the school board. The school board, I believe, as Bill Belichick said about his team, do your job.
Well, Robert, I think that goes to the heart.
The school board isn't doing their job.
I think that goes to the heart of what our speaker was talking about, and that is all these decades later, and they still haven't, even though they agreed to, and now we want to put pressure on them because the threat is being made it's an existential threat to the murals. What are you going to do to ensure that this time their obligation doesn't get swept under the rug? All these great ideas about providing that education, doing what Dewey was talking about and what she, an artist, is talking about, involving people in this. What are you going to do to make sure that they actually do what they said they were going to do before and then never did? It's been, what, 50 years, you said?
You know, I went to one of the hearings, I'm sorry to say, because of what went on there, but I believe I heard that the textbooks at George Washington High School have not been changed since 1996. A lot of sludge has passed under the bridge since then. Is that true, Lopez?
It's correct. Okay. Yes. May I say something? Sure. Yeah. Okay, thank you. I just want to add to, and thank you for your participation. I think that was very powerful. But I think, as I was saying, unfortunately, history has been told by those who win wars, and it takes a long time to change the one-sidedness of history in education, in politics, in the culture at large. Personally, I also did my DNA thing. I'm 51% Native American. I didn't know until recently. The rest is a mix of Spaniard, Jewish, Arab, Southern Asian, Eastern Asian, and whatnot. My ancestors were promiscuous. They mixed with everybody. Didn't have any problem with it, I guess. But the early ancestor has 250,000 years ago in the middle of Africa. In any case, the history of humanity is the history of cultures commingling with each other, interacting with each other. And it has been a tragic history of the Americas, first with the horrible Holocaust with Native America. According to the United Nations, 90% of Native Americans across the continent, all the way from Alaska to Tierra del Fuego, 90% of them were extincted within the first 100 years after Columbus' arrival to the Americas. And that includes all of us who have Native American blood. Whether or not we are culturally in tune or speaking our Native American languages, unfortunately, I lost the Nahua that I wish I would speak today. But it's part of our history, and the problem is that history hasn't been changed. I'm shocked to hear that the books in the Washington High School regarding history haven't been updated for decades. That's a major flaw of the education system. But I think the only way we're going to move ahead with this one-sided history and the way this country has not dealt with its own Holocaust, let alone use the destruction of Native American cultures, but the history of slavery and the history of discrimination with so many communities, Japanese Americans, Mexican Americans, and so on, is not going to change unless we find alliances with our friends. We have to distinguish who is the enemy and who is not the enemy. Victor Arnautoff was not the enemy. He was criticizing the oppressors. He was criticizing the ones who are telling history in a one-sided way. He was not the enemy. Dewey Crumpler complemented that message with a message of hope, with a message of togetherness. So that's the part that we should accept. And it's not that reality is black or white, that is everything right or everything is wrong. No, reality is more complex. So, as you know, one writer said, I'm sorry to say, it was a European writer, a German, Goethe in Faust say, the tree of theory is gray, while the tree of life is green. So the way to change things that are affecting us is a beautiful tree that has many branches and many alliances that we all belong to. And we should just really join efforts. And I will invite everybody who feels excluded from this participation to participate here. I think it would be great if any of your complaints could be translated into action together with all of us. Because we're not the enemy. We're not the enemy. We're part of the victims, as many other cultural communities. Some of them survive given the context, but we're not black or white. We're not friends or enemies. It's maybe more complex than that. My point is, let's join in the same struggle. Thank you.
But we have two more speakers who want to make comments, and let's do that, and then we'll ask Lope to wind things up.
All right, ma'am.
Thank you. My name is Kate Littleboy, and I want to thank the panel. It's a great brain trust of people here. So the conversation has kind of moved towards what my question is, which is sort of a process question, is in terms of changing the curriculum in either citywide or for this particular school, does anyone know how that works politically or otherwise? And I might be premature in even asking that question, but what does it take to change the curriculum in
May I
San
answer
Francisco?
quickly and tell you that thanks to David Wyman, who is here, who has put together a marvelous analysis, we have proposed to the Board of Education a series of 6 steps for educational program. And we just released it to the press. And I would invite you, David, you're there, I know, spend a minute with David, and but it's a good question.
Can they adopt it themselves, John, or does it have to get approval from the state? How does it work?
No, the school board has the ability when it comes to the murals and the curriculum surrounding the murals to offer definition. And if you go back to the 1970s and 80s, the school board did, in fact, mandate certain things, and then they forgot about them. But I appreciate it, and we're going to work on that. And believe me, the letter went out this week, so I'm hoping we get a response. I know there's a last comment over here.
Thank you.
Go ahead, Cynthia.
Okay. I want to thank you and honor the board or the panel today. It was really enlightening. And we are talking about education, and mine's similar to her comment. As an alumni of George Washington High School, I really felt honored to walk by the murals. They were absolutely gorgeous. Every day we walk through those doors. However, what I felt was missing was nobody ever addressed them. And I'm wondering if there's any way in the education process, when a first-time freshman, sophomore, whatever, comes into the school and they go through an orientation, had anybody ever thought to include just mentioning the murals? Because no one ever did do that. And they existed there for the whole 4 years I was there, and no one spoke about them. And I would like to see it addressed in orientation, and I'm not sure if that can be done.
So Cynthia is a classmate of mine. In the current letter that we sent to the school board, the 6-point plan, it suggested that orientation for freshmen or transfer students and do annual educational updates, bringing people like it's on the stage today, talking about things that we discovered. Because yesterday at the radio station, we all learned stuff we didn't know prior, and we thought we were pretty smart. And so I welcome that. I mean, I'm not trying to tell us this is one way only. So
let me
It
say
could avoid a
one
great
thing
deal of
about
misunderstanding.
that. At the dedication of the murals that I made in 1974, when they were dedicated, I spent about 3 minutes discussing how important it was for that suggestion to be taken seriously by the school board and George Washington High School. And I was told that they were going to use the murals as a way of introducing students to the curriculum of the school, because I made it clear that they should take the key that I made to explain my murals, and that they should use the history that Arnautoff articulated to make an explanation for his murals, and that it should be permanently placed in a plaque or something like that. And they ignored that. So, you know, your point, as well as the previous point of the person who spoke to the difficulty of representation, you know, the school board and the school itself really has to take young people's education much more seriously. Yes. And George Washington High School is going to continue to have this problem, as is many places, as the browning of America continues.
Well, there was an assumption to me that they figured we understood what those murals were about. And
yes.
Having come from a Japanese American background, we've had our own experiences.
Right.
But I am not insensitive to the indigenous people. My son's grandmother was 50% Coos. And so I'm very, very serious about this, and I've tried to, we've talked about it ourselves at home. But the students themselves need a little orientation about the beauty of this school and what it's about and the artwork that's there for them to enjoy.
So I'm going to conclude this. Thank you very much, Cynthia. You went quick. It's faster than I showed this yesterday. I want to thank you. I want to thank the entire, the Palace of Fine Arts, the board that allowed us to come, the incredible streaming crew that you don't know about, but they're there. Thank you, thank you, thank you. My illustrious, great speakers, all of them. And I want to thank everyone who's watching on the internet. And I would like to say one thing. I want to show you an ironic thing about this project, or this issue. I'm going to quote you a brief little part of Dianne Feinstein's letter of September 2019. Now, you know, she's our senior senator. She's also more moderate Democrat, if you will. And the reason why I bring this up is that our dear friend and alum, Danny Glover, is a Bernie Sanders guy, right? That's why he's not here. So I just thought it was kind of funny that you'd have a standing, seated senator who quotes Danny Glover in her letter. Isn't that kind of wild to think that? And here it is. And this is just the last paragraph or so. Danny Glover, one of George Washington High School's best known graduates, was quoted today in the Examiner. Here's his quote. "To destroy them or block them from view would be akin to book burning. We would be missing the opportunity for enhanced historic introspection this moment has provided us." Back to Senator Feinstein. "I strongly agree with his feelings about these murals. It also bears the question of what art or written word will be next." Powerful to me. I hope you go through the required environmental process. Time will bring a greater level of rationality to this discussion, and the board will see these murals for what they are, a rendition of American history that we must learn from and never repeat. On behalf of the George Washington High School Association, have a great afternoon. Thank you very much.